Prominent scientist and academic Richard Dawkins sat down for an interview with the Times. Now, before I continue, let me remind those of you who don't know, he actually had a minor stroke recently, and he's recovering. Naturally, I hope he makes a full recovery, and my thoughts are with him. The God Delusion, to this day, is one of my favorite books. If you haven't read it yet, you should. Okay, I recommend that. That's probably book number 1 on the list of books you should read. You can go from being a wishy-washy agnostic or go from being moderately religious or whatever, and that might snap you out of it like that. So if you haven't read that, check it out. Definitely recommend it. So here's what he said in the talk that's causing some controversy. According to The Independent, quote, "People are terrified of being thought racist for criticizing Islam. There's an awful confusion in many people's minds. They think Islam is a race, which of course it isn't. If you're seen to criticize Islam, you are often accused of racism, which is absurd. I'm all for offending people's religion. I think it should be offended at every opportunity." Okay, so there are really 2 points there and 2 separate issues to discuss. On one of the issues, I 100% agree with him, and on the other one, I actually think it's a little more nuanced. So first, let me go to the total agreement. The total agreement is with that last part. He says, "I'm all for offending people's religion. I think it should be offended at every opportunity." Yeah, because religion is just a set of beliefs, a doctrine, holy books, that are not actually holy. There's no evidence that they're true. There's no evidence that they're real. There's no logical, rational reason to believe it. So to attack a doctrine is to just attack ideas that are, by their very nature, irrational because it's not based on truth. It's not based on science or finding the nature of reality. It's just a bunch of idiots who wrote shit on pages, going back thousands of years. Why should anybody take that seriously? Nobody should take that seriously. And he's right that you should attack it. And at the very least, you should let people know, look, even if you're going to be religious, just keep everything in perspective and just know that that's not, it's not scientific. It's not proven. There's over 4,000 religions that exist today. So even just from a mathematical probability perspective, are you really that special that you happen to be born into the one religion that is true and all the others are bullshit and wrong? But my mommy and daddy were so special, they happen to be right and then pass on the correct religion to me. Honestly, it is a childish way of thinking, and you should be embarrassed if you think like that. So, on that front, he's totally right. Offend religion all day long, and you're just right to do that because you're just attacking beliefs and ideas that are not based in reality. And even if people say, hey, I use my religion for good, that's great. I'm happy for you. But there are reasons to act good other than because it says so in Mother Goose or it's in Narnia. Sorry, but it's true. Okay, so there I totally agree with him. Where I think it's more nuanced is the first point where he says, look, people are terrified of being thought racist for criticizing Islam. There's an awful confusion in many people's minds. They think Islam is a race. Of course it isn't. Yada, yada. If you're seen to criticize Islam, you're often accused of racism, which is absurd. Okay. Technically, literally, of course he's right that Islam isn't a race. So, yeah, you're not racist for criticizing Islam. I just told you to criticize all religions, including Islam. Of course. But there's a point here that perhaps is slightly overlooked by Richard, which is the idea of not racism, but the idea of bigotry against all Muslims. Now, I don't think he's guilty of that. But are there people who are guilty of that? Of course there are. If you look in Europe, if you look at plenty of people in the United States, there are plenty of people who are bigoted against all Muslims. And they view all Muslims as fundamentalists and as extremists, and they equate them with the worst of the worst, people who are jihadists, people who are Islamists. So, is that real, and is that a form of bigotry? Yes. Some people call that Islamophobia. I tend to agree with Richard Dawkins in that I don't like that word because it says that you can't criticize Islam when you should criticize Islam. I just like the term anti-Muslim bigotry. So I do think anti-Muslim bigotry is wrong, and I would just add that it's not like, I feel like he's portraying it as something that is just so irrational, and where did it come from that people are concerned about Muslims? And honestly, I would respond to that by saying, look, especially in the West, so I'm American, obviously, there's no doubt, there's no denying that we did, under George W. Bush, he started it, we launched the war on terror, we invaded Iraq, a country that did not attack us, and then as a result of that, minimum 200,000 civilians were killed in the Middle East. The overwhelming majority of them Muslims. And this is people who, they wouldn't be dead and they wouldn't have had their lives ruined if it wasn't for the unnecessary intervention. So, are people, Westerners, guilty of that? Yes! Should they be guilty of that? Yes, our tax dollars funded it. That's the government we voted for. So, yeah, now many liberals are admittedly sensitive about Muslims because they feel like we did this horrific thing, and now there's this callous attitude of like, you know, hey, who gives a fuck about them anyway? They're all terrorists. And obviously the response to that is, no, they're not all terrorists. And yes, anti-Muslim bigotry is a real thing. And we need to be nuanced on this issue where we can say two things at the same time. Number one, Islam is totally wrong and inaccurate, and I would argue dumb. And it's not bigoted to say that. It's accurate to say that. I put Islam in the same category as all the religions. It's just not true. And in many cases, it is potentially dangerous. The literalists, the Salafists, the Wahhabi fundamentalists, yeah, they prove it can be dangerous too. So that's one conversation, and that's one where me and Richard totally agree 100%. But then the other conversation is anti-Muslim bigotry real? Yes. Should we talk about anti-Muslim bigotry and acknowledge the problem that it is? Yes. And on that one, he may even agree with me, but I just feel like his rhetoric oftentimes is more along the lines of making this point over and over, which is, it's not racist to criticize Islam, it's not racist to criticize Islam, it's not racist to criticize Islam. Dude, I totally agree with that. But what liberals are mostly saying is anti-Muslim bigotry is a real thing, and we should acknowledge that and we should talk about it, because both those conversations are important. In the same way that we should and can criticize Judaism and not think all Jews are bad because that would be anti-Semitism, we should criticize Islam and at the same time understand that not all Muslims are bad because that would be anti-Muslim bigotry. It's honestly the exact same thing, and I think that what some people want from Richard Dawkins, and from many so-called new atheists, is just more of the acknowledgement on this idea of anti-Muslim bigotry. And again, I think there's a good chance Richard agrees with what I'm saying. But all I'm saying back to him is the onus and the focus seems to be on this one aspect of it. The aspect of, it's not racism to criticize Islam, and there's much less talk about actual anti-Muslim bigotry, which is a genuine thing, and it's a real thing, and it's coming from the far right in both Europe and the United States.